Hello everyone. This is part 2 of my how to play as and against Glacier in startup. Um, Playing against Glacier is a really complex thing. I think generally the runner side can be very complex, but can have a very high skill ceiling and get you a lot of benefits to play it well. And that's not something I think I even do that well in practice, but I think this game actually has some really great examples of stuff CD Rock did well and stuff that, when you're facing similar situations, you can hopefully learn from. Um, Generally, when you're thinking about matchups against Glacier, it follows the most archetypical pattern of the early game where the runner has an advantage by making the corp spread out their resources, the mid game where the corp gets an edge while the runner is catching up to this completed board state, and then you have the end game where the runner has all of their breakers out, a lot of money, and it's about contesting the remote at the right time, contesting centrals at the right time, and sniffing out where agendas are. In my other video, you've seen the result of this game, but I actually think by the end of this game, there's a pretty reasonable case to make that CD Rock 7 could have, or maybe even should have, won this game. And it's just a couple small mistakes, a couple small changes, and they would have won this game. And a couple of changes in how R&D worked, and they would have certainly also won this game. Um, how you play against Glacier is going to change a lot based on your deck. In startup, where there are not as many sort of aggressive and disruptive tools for the runner or for the corporation for that matter, um, a lot of runners are going to lean on sort of their end game where they can have cards like Rizeki down, which just give them value every single turn in a way the corp doesn't really get to interact with. So having one or two Rizekis down early can give the corp a lot, or can give the runner, excuse me, a lot of sort of long-term pressure against the corporation, because once the runner has enough money, it's very hard for the corporation to use a single scoring route safely multiple times. Additionally, you also want to have some pressure in the early game, so cards like Sure Gamble and Jailbreak are very good. And the Class Act is a great card to have early in the game because it draws you a bunch of cards to refill after you've played some of your other cards. And then it's another sort of drip value card. It says my click to draw action is basically twice as good as it would be otherwise, um, which is a lot of value. So this is basically as good of a hand as you could ask for. Exactly why Inside Job is good, I think we'll get to a little bit later. Um, I think if I had one deck building complaint about this deck is that CD Rock is not running Boomerang, which is just an all-star card for a bunch of reasons, and actually combos very, very well with Inside Job, and would have basically cleanly won the game if they had put it in their deck. So you keep this hand, it looks fantastic, and if the corporation doesn't have a central ice, you can probably just jailbreak very early in the turn, probably after playing a Sure Gamble for reasons we'll talk about in just a moment. Um, but in a situation like this, I think a very reasonable first turn is something like draw click 1, play Gamble, play Rizeki, play the Class Act. That's not quite what CD Rock does. They um, prefer saving the draw for the Class Act. If that's the case, I would maybe try poking a central. You'll get, most likely, the run will get ended, and that's okay. Um, but just clicking for a credit feels a little bit slow to me here. Another mistake that they make here is bringing the two penny shavers in and moving the Class Act to the bottom. The Class Act is one of the duplicate cards, or I should say unique cards, which is the diamond by its name, that you actually want to have multiple copies of. Because when you install a unique card, you have to trash. You go into a game state where you have to pick one of your two copies to trash. But when you install a second copy of the Class Act, you trash the first one. You go, well, whatever. Except that the text of when the turn which you installed this resource ends, draw 4 cards, will be active on your new copy of the Class Act. So when you install a second copy of the Class Act, you trash your first one, but then you draw 4 new cards at the end of your turn. This can be great for dodging punitive counter strike because if you have 3 cards or 4 cards in hand, you play your class act, so you drop down to 3, but then you'll draw 4 and be up at 7, and so now the corp would need 3 punitive counterstrikes to kill you if you stole a 5-3 agenda. So the class act is good to have here, much better than having a second penny shaver. Um, so okay, but that's a small mistake, and I'm going to try not to harp too much on small mistakes because I think I want to more focus on big play things. We're going to see CD Rock contest the server 1. I can go somewhat either way on contesting this remote this early. I think the nice thing about this, if we're thinking about our early game model, is that forcing the corp to spend resources protecting the remote generally means that they aren't spending those resources protecting their centrals, so that we can get more accesses on the centrals throughout the course of the game. The fact that they have 1 card in HQ suggests that maybe we can, if we poke it, we'll get some really good information. We can poke R&D and get some good information, and have some really good ideas of what's in Server 1. Server 1 also likely contains a pretty valuable card of either Spin Doctor, Anoetic Void, or an agenda. The kind of miss hits for us are probably actually the Spin Doctor and a Regolith mining license. We can surmise this is probably not a daily quest because they would almost certainly res it or leave it in HQ. You generally don't install daily quests just to leave them there. So what CD Rock ends up doing, I think, is good except for one major mistake, which is that they access a card on 4 credits, and they have a click that they could have just turned into a credit. This is a issue, and as if you remember the game, this is a Bologna campaign, Bologna, which I think is not necessarily right to have gone in the server this early, but if CD Rock had 5 credits, if they had either not installed the Penny Shaver or clicked for a credit before making the run, they would be in a fantastic spot here. They would steal the Bologna, and yeah, they would not have a lot of credits, but Rozeki and Penny Shaver would help them recover, along with the Class Act, finding them cards they want and not cards they don't. And they'd be up 3-0, which is a great place to be against early Glacier. Glacier often loses because they bled out too many points of agendas early in the game. So when you're playing against NBN, you always want to access with 5 credits, if at all possible. And then we actually see what I think is another sort of big mistake, is valuing security testing over the Bravado. Bravado is a all-star card, and you want to play it in Criminal, and especially in Glacier, where it helps you trade tempo very favorably. I use the word tempo a lot. Basically what I mean is who is able to make threats to win the game. And so something like Bravado means the runner makes a run, which is an action that you generally want to be taking many times in the game, and then they're going to make money back at the end of the run. And the corp's only real options are either to let them get a free access, and then the runner is going to make even more money off of it, or the corporation can spend their own resources to stop a run that they might otherwise want to let through. So Bravado just gives a criminal player a lot of value. Security testing against Glacier decks is pretty bad because all they have to do is draw an ice, of which they are probably running almost 20 copies of in their deck, put it on Archives, R&D, HQ, and their scoring remote, and then it's turned off for the rest of the game. Security testing is really strong against asset decks generally because they go wide and can't usually afford, to ice everything they're doing. So I would always take the Bravado over the security testing here. Another thing that we can be thinking about is David has 13 credits. Anytime we have 5 credits, we have a plausible threat on server 1 to make our GameNet villain, spend credits to keep us out. So even just going something like click 1, I'm going to run server 1, what's the worst you can do to me? And the answer is probably not a lot. Or if it is something like a toll booth, which we will probably see eventually, it ends up being a pretty favorable exchange for the runner. The Corp will have spent 8, and we lose 3, which isn't ideal, but we've got Rozeki dripping. So every turn we can stretch out the game, the better it's going to be on average for us as the runner. The other thing is, if we can get the Corp to spend 8, that makes the central servers weaker. And so this is sort of the game you play against Glacier, is you want to poke in one place to then open up a weakness somewhere else. And we sort of spend this turn building up, taking free accesses when we can. If your access is expensive, don't take it. But if it's going to cost you nothing, by all means, you should really consider taking it. And then here we see the Corp finally going to advance this Bologna. So this is a great turn to pressure server 1. If we had, instead of this Abagnale, if we had a Boomerang here, we could actually have a very real, credible threat on just stealing this Bologna now that the Corp has spent even more tempo protecting it. And especially if we had Boomerang inside job, this whole server just melts for 4 credits, which is an amazing value. But I think the other thing that CD Rock does, which is very good here, is they start pressuring central servers. So they say, I'm not going to win, I'm not going to contest this remote. I think it's going to be too expensive for me. Instead, oh, I'm sorry. So what CD Rock does, I think is pretty smart, which just says, 12 credits isn't enough to res that much scary ice, and if I can get my corroder down with some real cash, you have to have a code gate that stops me. There aren't really sentries that end the run in startup. I know that's not entirely true, but that's broadly true of what people are building right now. And like, CD Rock gets a little punished here, but you're going to get sometimes punished when you face check. And at the end of the day, this isn't that bad of a punishment, because the villain here, the Corp, had to spend 11 credits to keep us out. Or they could have also used the analytic void that they installed. But both of those, I think, were we would be okay with being the case, because now we've just spent 1 click running this remote and bought ourselves 4 extra clicks to go and contest that remote or to contest centrals. And we see that the Corp continues to invest more in the server 1, which says, great, we can start pressuring other servers. The thing I don't love is this draw here. It feels like a very small thing, but we will land a jailbreak on one of R&D or HQ, basically. 4 credits isn't really enough to keep us out of both of these centrals, because right now we don't have a way to get in server 1. The Corp doesn't know that. We could have a Boomerang or an inside job that might be enough to get us in. Well, inside job wouldn't be, but maybe a Boomerang is probably good enough to get us in once. So we want to save this click that we're spending to draw and just jailbreak right away. Because you want to try and keep the window as wide open as possible, and every click you spend sort of not exploiting a window is sort of narrowing your early game advantage. And what we'll end up seeing, right, is by the end of this turn, the runner's going to have an extra click they don't really know what to do with, and if they had 2 clicks, they may have been able to mount a challenge on server 1 or do something else. This is also a case where I don't think it's worth it to break the gold farmer, because the Corp is at 1 credit, and it's really important to track Corp credit totals, especially against Glacier in the early game, but they can often struggle to stay up on money. Basically, we would be breaking this gold farmer, giving the corporation $2, which is gets into 3, which is enough to score in server 1, and then we're only getting 1 access and a card draw out of it. It's pretty close to neutral value, but I would certainly, because of how low we're getting and the fact that we couldn't steal a Bologna if we accessed one, would really lean towards not taking it. Then we go and make a run on HQ, which I think makes a lot of sense. There's only 2 cards in HQ. There's been a good number of cards drawn. And so there's a decent chance of an agenda being in HQ, and in fact we managed to steal a Bologna, which is a big deal. Small note: if you have a penny shaver, it's always as efficient as clicking for a credit, so you should take the extra money while you can. Um, so the Corp is to some degree threatening to score a 3-2 here, and they've now made the Essentials kind of expensive enough that we want to be a little bit careful about going for single accesses here. But a card like the Maker's Eye gives us multi-access. The issue with a card like the Maker's Eye is that we won't have enough money to steal the Bologna. So it makes sense to sit back and wait a little bit until we have enough money to steal what's, presumably the last Bologna. With two of them gone, it's not a total crime to run with fewer and access with fewer than 5 credits, but I think you should have a very good reason, and that reason should be I'm going to lose the game if I don't. And that's the thing to remember against Glacier, is sometimes the right move is not to run. It feels bad, but sometimes you're hurting your game plan more by running than you are by not running. And I think, not putting the Rizeki down because you'll have to overinstall it, take the breaker out later, is fine. It just, Rizeki does take 4 turns to be the same as clicking, or to be better than clicking for a credit, and there's a chance you'll need all 3 of your breakers in the next 4 turns. Because now we're sort of transitioning into the middle game, where all the Essentials cost enough to res, or it's expensive enough to run the Centrals, and it's expensive enough to get in the remote that you need to start building up your runner engine to contest the Corpse engine. And so, I think City Rock is doing a good job of generally slowly building up. I think Bravadoing HQ is fine there, I think. It's unlikely to be an agenda just because of how safe Server 1 is right now. If the Corp had drawn an agenda, it probably would have ended up in Server 1 at some point. But we are building up. We now have answers to everything but the drafter in this remote. And one thing when you're playing against Anoetic Void is that the best turns to contest the Anoetic Void are the turns when there are no agendas in here, because you're then forcing the Corp to delay time protecting their Anoetic Void. If they don't protect the Anoetic Void, great, you've made the remote unsafe and you'll probably win the game. If it's right here. If they do spend resources protecting Anoetic Void, that means the next time they draw an agenda, they won't have enough cards in hand to go in. Now, obviously, you have to be very careful about this, because you need to make sure that you have enough money to get into the remote with Anoetic Void in it multiple times. But this is where Bravado shines even brighter, because you can run once, and then you will make almost all of that money back at the end of the run, even if the corporation ends the run. Which is why Bravado is just such an amazing card. This I don't love, because we know even without this ice being rezzed, we're going to go down to 6 credits and single access. And 6 credits is not enough to go in Server 1 if the corporation is able to draw an agenda through our R&D dig. You can, against certain corps, set up what's called an R&D lock, where you see every card off of R&D before they do. But usually that relies on having very cheap runs or a lot of multi-access on your runs. And we just don't have that in this case. Penny Shaver is technically a credit discount on all of our runs, but that's not really going to be enough this game, where there's just a lot of slog that we're going to have to get through. And I'm going to sort of speed up, because what we're doing as the runner right now is we're trying to get our full set of answers in. One thing to note, money doesn't matter immensely. The thing to worry about with money is punitive counterstrike, and that is a concern that we should have against a deck where the only stuff we've seen is Bolognas. But we're very close on credits right now, and it's going to take a long time for that to really add up. So we can keep kind of playing slow. We're going to spend a lot of credits here, but we're going to see, 3 new cards, which is a big deal. And we have enough credits to steal the Bologna, which is great. And so we didn't see anything, which is a bummer. That's now 2 Maker's Eyes, 6 cards we've seen on R&D, no agendas. It's a little bit unlikely and a little bit unfortunate, but sometimes that's how it goes. I really like this play of then saying, yeah, I need Mutual Favor to get my breaker out, but it's hard to make valuable runs, but Mutual Favor is great. Combining the Maker's Eye and Mutual Favor is just is a really nice way to get this deck humming along. So the Corp is basically not presenting any threats here. So the best thing for us to be doing now is building up. So we need to get back close. We need to get enough money so that we can run server 1 a couple of times or get down some multi-access pressure. And so drawing makes a lot of sense. Inside Job is a nice way to challenge the remote. I would probably still be drawing here because we've got 2 more sure gambles, 2 more dirty laundry. Sorry, not 2 more sure gambles, 2 more daily casts, and 2 more dirty laundries in the list, and at least 1 more bravado, and probably some other multi-access tools. At some point, getting the Docklands pass down might be nice because it helps pay for the runs on HQ and helps us make sure that it really is clear, though the way the Corp is playing probably implies it is fairly clear. Our goal as the runner here is just to make sure that we can stay close enough on money that we can contest if able. So the sequencing here I think is important. We know that we're going to have to run server 1 at least twice. If that's the case, I would always recommend bravadoing first because it's going to pay you back the money that you lose going into server 1, and then you can inside out the second one. You'll still get the same savings on the ice you skip, but you'll have more money to do, it's your second run, but you'll get the money from bravado to help power that instead of having to inside job and then power your bravado run on whatever econ you had at the start of the turn. The other option here would probably be to bravado R&D just to stay up in credits and see a single card, because Anoetic Void is just going to kind of ruin your day here. I think bravadoing, you can't bravado R&D right now and get in, which is sort of the downside of playing Inside Job in the way that was done. I think I would rather bravado HQ here. There are potentially agendas in HQ. You're not going to score anything out of archives. In the worst case scenario for the Corp, Spin Doctor will get used in Shuffle. And knowing what this ice is on HQ tells you something about the corporation's board state. We get some econ back in place. We're in a bit of a bad spot here as the runner now. But this is maybe a turn where we could think about, is there a way for me to get into server 1? Because if I can contest server 1 this turn somehow, and then that's my way of stopping the Corp from making it in. This upgrade on R&D is probably another Anoetic Void, and that would be 8 influence gone. This would be 10, 11 influence. So there's maybe a third Anoetic Void, but getting rid of 2 of them would be a big deal. It maybe means we want to run the Spin Doctor before we do that, just so that we allow the fewest Anoetic Void shuffles possible. I don't love this Dirty Laundry on Archives because what we're doing is we're spending. Well, technically we could break Tithe for free, which I think we maybe CD Rock maybe doesn't do. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. You should always break these you break both subroutines on Tithe so you get your money back from Galter, and you break Pop-Up Window with Unity so that GameNet doesn't get its trigger. So basically you're spending 1 credit to gain 3 credits and a penny shaver dollar, which is like marginal compared to trying to get that same effect on HQ where you at least see a card and get some information. The security testing, I guess, gives you 2 credits additionally, but just makes this run even weirder because it means you're not triggering the Spin Doctor. And then we're going to spend 4, 8, 12 on a single access on R&D, and we will no longer be able to threaten this remote. So don't take runs if they don't take a single access on the central if it's taking you out of your ability to contest the remote on a future turn, which is exactly what ends up happening here. See a single card, get a single dollar back, and then after that we draw the Maker's Eye, which we would much rather have played. And one thing to remember is that Anoetic Void is unique, so if we can get the Corp to res a second Anoetic Void, that means that their scoring remote is now a lot worse, and we can potentially contest it. So bravadoing archives is very low value. It's just for money, and in many cases we want to use the bravado for more value than that. And so we started the turn with 5 credits. Okay, we're going to end with 14. Not bad. So that run's actually pretty reasonable in that sense. Here, clicking for a credit, we could have clicked Penny Share and potentially threatened this remote twice. Bummer. We play our third Maker's Eye. We're going to make it in. We're going to see. So this is where probably, right, if we had trashed the Spin Doctor a couple turns ago, there wouldn't be any Void to shuffle back in. It might be a slightly more valuable shuffle for us. And we finally see our first agenda on 9 cards, or 10 cards. No, I actually think there's maybe 11 cards access to R&D that game. So this is actually pretty unlucky for CD Rock. I think one thing that we'll see when the screen pops up at the end, right, there were 19 cards access. As far as I can tell, I went back and counted. These are actually 19 cards accessed out of R&D and HQ, not counting any of the cards from archives. Generally, for the runner to have a 50% chance of winning the game, you need about 17 to 18 random accesses off of R&D. HQ is very close. The way that math works out with HQ is a little bit funky, but CD Rock accessed about the right number of cards to win. And what happened is that there was there was no third agenda. The third agenda didn't show up until the Corp was more than halfway through their deck, which is going to be hard for the runner to win. When the runner spends a lot of their resources early, spending 3-4+ credits on single accesses, it's very easy for the runner to burn themselves out before agendas start piling up in HQ. And this is the sort of game where that gets really punished, where there just aren't agendas on R&D for a long time, and so the runner spent a lot of energy, a lot of credits, kind of burning themselves out. Obviously, there are going to be games where the Corp gets flooded, and that wins you the game. But generally, when stuff starts to be 3-4 credits, I would say start thinking about your backup game plan. Make sure you've got a strong, stable economy. Make sure that you can contest the remote on 2 consecutive turns before you start taking those single accesses again. You can take multi-access cards like the Maker's Eye will still be good. Dockland's Pass still makes HQ accesses pretty good. But time can be on your side because agendas really hurt the Glacier player when they start to group up. And so as long as you can threaten the remote, you're in a great spot to do so. The biggest lessons for this particular game, of course, is always access cards with 5 credits so that you can steal a Bologna if the opportunity emerges. And then, make sure you're picking your cards appropriately for the game state that you're in. Security testing fired 2 or 3 times the whole game, and they were not the most, it was the runner spent a lot of resources making that work, where they could have had a bravado for much longer. Hopefully these ramblings have been somewhat helpful for how to play runner against Glacier, and hopefully I'll have some examples of my own gameplay when I go into my next set of videos, which will be diagnosing how my startup deck building decks have gone. I've played a couple of games. I'm going to try and get a few more in, but that should be what I'm on next time. And just as a reminder, I've got a startup tournament And I think last video I just said the completely wrong date. It is in fact not this Saturday, but the following Saturday, June 5th. There will be I think we'll be getting the startup kit as prizes. The top player will get their pick of prize, and then the rest of prizes will go out in a raffle system, with the goal to try and get a prize out to every participant. But thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed. Thanks.